5th of April, Easter Day. Sermon on Matthew chapter 28, verses 1 to 15. It's Easter Day, and we have as our Gospel reading Matthew's account of the resurrection of Jesus, his defeat of death, and his rising to glorious immortal life. In each of the four Gospels, it is the women who first came to the tomb where Jesus had been buried, and who received the first understanding that he had risen. Matthew tells us that it was Mary Magdalene and another Mary who visited the tomb. We must assume that the violent earthquake, as an angel descended, rolled back the stone that sealed the tomb and sat on it, had occurred before the women arrived, and also that the guards who were present were already catatonic, immobile and unresponsive, as Matthew reports. The angel spoke to the startled women. He was certainly an amazing sight, dazzling like lightning and dressed in clothes white as snow. He told the women not to be afraid, for he knew they'd come to see Jesus' tomb. But the tomb was empty. Jesus had risen. The women could see where his body had lain, and their task now was to tell the disciples the wonderful news. The women did so, becoming the first witnesses of the resurrection, apostles of Christ. They met with Jesus' disciples, and as they shared the news, Jesus himself came among them. It's a story simply told, and yet it forms the bedrock of the Christian faith. Without the resurrection of Jesus, Christianity has no meaning or purpose. If Jesus had not risen and revealed himself to his followers, all his teaching would now be just another dusty volume of philosophy, if anyone had bothered to write it at all. Instead, however, what Jesus taught and the promise of salvation he offers has become the greatest force for good in our world and the hope of millions. It all stands or falls, though, on the resurrection. Do we believe it? Many churchgoers cast doubt on the story, speculating that Jesus, rather than rising, lived on in the hearts and minds of his disciples. Or they consider his resurrection was spiritual. He didn't appear, but came as a ghostly presence to inspire his followers. It all sounds very intellectual and superior. We who believe may even seem gullible in the eyes of people who think like that. However, I'd rather be judged as gullible than to miss the significance of the physical resurrection of Jesus Christ. So let us look more carefully and see just how well this story holds together. The fact that it is the women who first witnessed the empty tomb is significant. Anyone aiming at inventing a convincing story would not have women as his witnesses. In the first century Israel, the testimony of a woman could not be counted in a court of law. Surely then, anyone writing a fictitious account would choose a well-respected man as his primary witness. Furthermore, what would be achieved by inventing the story of the resurrection? The followers of Jesus would no doubt have felt foolish for putting their faith in a crucified teacher, one who had raised false hopes, told tall stories, let them down, failed. Pride might have tempted them to pretend he defeated death, but it would soon have occurred to them that to do so would put them in danger. They had nothing to gain and much to lose by preaching about a man who'd overcome crucifixion. On the other hand, though, these same men spent their lives doing just that. It cost them everything, led them into suffering, derision, serious persecution, and eventually, for most of them, death. But it was because they believed it was all true. They had been convinced. Some have suggested that Jesus revived in the cool of the tomb. He hadn't really died. But that is most unlikely. People didn't survive crucifixion. Roman soldiers who carried it out had a duty to see that it was completed. But even if Jesus had recovered in the tomb, how could a man who'd been through the rigours of crucifixion find the strength to roll away the heavy stones sealing him in? How could he have walked into Jerusalem on his damaged feet and convinced anyone that he was the Lord of life? The disciples would certainly have had no reason to steal the body themselves so that they could claim Jesus had risen, and would have had great difficulty in getting past the Roman guards that Pilate had set before the tomb. Nor was there any advantage for the Jewish religious leaders to remove the body, and if they had, they would have promptly returned it once the rumours started that Jesus was alive again. Finally, we have the ludicrous story put about by the chief priests and elders, that the disciples had stolen the body while the guards were asleep. That is the tall story that they bribed the guards to repeat if they were questioned. But if the guards were asleep at the time, how could they have seen who had robbed the tomb of its occupant? And who ever heard of Roman guards falling asleep on duty and being rewarded for doing so? It was, in fact, a capital offence. It seems to me to be proof indeed that the religious leaders knew full well that Jesus had risen, and they were desperate to try to prove otherwise. Where does that leave us then? With a risen Lord, a deathless Messiah, Christ, our loving Saviour? This Easter morning we must be full of joy to know that death is defeated, the days of sin are numbered, Christ's kingdom is coming, and we ourselves are the living proof. If Christ had not risen, his disciples would have admitted defeat, slunk away, most likely recorded nothing. The Christian faith would never have been established. The church would not exist, and we would not be here, as indeed we are, remembering, worshipping, and full of thankfulness for our living Saviour, Jesus Christ the Lord.